And welcome to an especially pricey edition of Ben's Junk. Because Ben's Junk don't come cheap. Occasionally. So please bear with me. I have a lot to say about this thing, and as such, this is going to be a very chatty video, much more so than usual. But anyway, I've been threatening for the last year to replace my old Newmark turntable, which I've had for over a decade and has been seen in numerous archive episodes. And after waiting until after I moved, I have finally done just that. Now, I haven't gotten rid of the Newmark, it's a bedroom turntable now. But anyway, I was kind of waffling on whether or not to try and acquire a vintage or vintage-ish turntable or to buy a new current one. And after arriving at a whopping $350 budget, which included any extra parts or accessories, I wound up going with the current, as of my making this, so the 2018 edition of the Audio-Technica AT-LP120. So my list of demands for the new turntable included a direct drive quartz lock motor, and also the ability to fine tune the speed, and I can kind of go either way with that here, so you can see it kind of going back and forth at my will. And I also wanted 78 RPM capability, and I wanted auto return, so, at the conclusion of the side of a record, the needle lifts itself and goes back to its resting spot. And just the basics, like anti-skate and an adjustable tone arm and counterweight. And so after rooting around and looking at the specs and prices of a vintage turntable in my price range, that would meet as many of my demands as possible, in the end, a used one felt like a little too much of a crapshoot. So despite a very mixed bag of reviews, I went with this one. And this hit all but one of my targets. There is no auto return on this thing. Now, in the name of full disclosure, this is not the same unit that I showed off on the How I Spent My Summer episode I did a couple of weeks ago. So here's the deal. 15 days after buying the original turntable, the one seen in that episode, it suddenly started emitting very badly overdriven sound. So I did a basic troubleshooting run through. I made sure it wasn't my receiver that was acting up, and nothing was visibly apparently wrong with the turntable itself, and unplugging and plugging it back in, that sort of stuff. And as it turned out, I purchased this at Best Buy. The return/exchange period with the store was only 15 days. This was day number 15, and it was less than an hour before the store closed for the night. I was in the middle of making record ripoffs, and so I quickly chucked it back in the box, took it down to the store, and exchanged it for another unit about 10 minutes before the store closed for the night. And while I was there, I purchased a 4-year extended warranty on it. I guess I was a little panicked, and that pushed me over budget in the process. And I did that just in case the original unit that I returned wasn't merely a fluke. But I've purchased a fair amount of Audio-Technica stuff over the years, like microphones, and they've all been fine prior to this. So I'm trying to be nice, and I'm just trying to chalk it up to I got a dud. Now, today, the day that I'm shooting this, marks day number 11 since I acquired this particular unit, so knock on wood, or plastic, as it were. And I got a lot of notes with me. Anyway, when I got the original unit, I did a general tune-up on it. I aligned the cartridge and set the tone arm weight and the anti-skate according to what played nicest with my two best read most difficult stereo test records. And having said that, I feel like I overshot the alignment because while I was able to nearly eliminate the dreaded inner groove distortion, it also left the stereo image a tad skewed to the left. And you can actually hear this on that Record Ripoffs installment that I was working on because I just didn't have time to go back and fix it. And so I had intended to take another crack at aligning the cartridge, and of course, once I exchanged it, I'd had a little time to think about it, and I figured, well, let me see if there's another protractor I can use to align this. And sure enough, Audio Technica itself offers a paper protractor that you can print out for their higher end turntables, and this particular unit being one of them. So I printed it out at the proper 100% size, took the black dot here, and then just stuck it on the turntable as dead center as I could, checked the cartridge against the grids, and they were fine. Dare I say they were perfect. But on the previous unit, I had used only my good old Geodisc. And on that one, it was a little askew, and actually a fair amount. So what I wound up doing was I kind of just went halfway between the two grids on the two different protractors. And then from there, I just had a pair of headphones on and a big selection of records, different periods and masterings and vinyl quality and all. And just kind of did it all by ear. Just tweaked the cartridge a little. And once I found that as best of a sweet spot as I could find between least inner groove distortion and a most accurate stereo image, I think I did all right. So you'll hear that in the demos, and you can judge me, and probably harshly, knowing YouTube, on that. And so speaking of cartridges, while the cartridge on here, which is the AT-95E, I believe, it's light years ahead of the stock cartridge that was on my old Newmark. But I was still kind of wondering if there wasn't a little room for improvement. So, as best as I could via online reviews and downloadable audio files, I started rooting around for another cartridge. And the most viable one to my ears, ones I could find actual real demos of, was the Nagaoka MP110H cartridge, which runs, I think, $120. And having said that, it seemed like a fairly minor improvement, so much so that I've put the whole idea on the back burner. And I figured, well, if the stock cartridge starts crawling up my ass, then I'll invest in it, and then I'll just use the stock one for 78s. And speaking of 78s, I went and purchased, just after I got the original unit at least, a separate stylus for 78 RPM records. And herein lies a little nitpick about this machine. So you can use this little switch here, and you can do a soft touchdown when you're trying to land the needle on the record. And I think it was just my own stupidity because, we're running at 78 RPM here. But I had it all lined up, put the thing down, and it landed just on that magic spot of the outer groove, or where it should be. And it shot right off the record in this direction, and it dragged a bit across the felt. But, I was there, my hand was there, so I just, got it. I think it made it maybe one revolution in the time it took to get it off, because like I said, I was right there. And it still plays 78s fine, although knowing me, I'll buy another stylus anyway. And so that was an experience, but I've done the same with 33s and 45s, and I've had no trouble. And I've read people having trouble with it online, but aside from my little botched experiment with the 78, it didn't really mean anything. Now, the most significant complaint I have about this turntable is the platter itself. And it's not perfect. So if I had the camera at a better angle, if you could look at it straight on this away, it's not perfectly level. It rocks just a touch. And having said that, I haven't noticed any drag or speed issues, so it hasn't affected the performance, bottom line. So it irks me a little, but it doesn't seem to have any real world bearing on this thing. And as for some other complaints that I've read online, I've heard that the anti skate is ineffective on this particular model. And it's been fine for me so far, both units. So I wonder if some of the complainers didn't set it up properly. The only thing I have noticed with the anti-skate is on the new mark, you just had to crank it all the way for it to have any effect whatsoever, to keep things at least somewhat chugging along. That is not the case with this one. You really do need to set it up in line with the counterweight. So the counterweight's at 2 grams right now, so I set this for 2 on the anti-skate. And also, after all these years, I think I did a pretty decent job setting it up. I finally broke down and bought one of these little stylus scales. And so I was able to line it up pretty good. And if you do it the way the manual says, it's fine, at least for me. So, yeah, take that any way you want it. And the only issue I've had is if you crank it all the way, like I used to with the new mark, then it deadens the sound and it feels like it's kind of really digging into the grooves, and it's just not pleasant. So I just got to wonder if people weren't paying attention. And let's see, I've also read that some people have noticed rattle and hum and thudding on this model. And I personally haven't encountered anything like that on either unit that I've had, unless it's a bad, beaten up record. So, like, some of the stuff I do on archive, it's all scratched up already. It's on cheap vinyl, maybe groove crammed, pressed off center. Then you kind of start to have some minor issues, but I chalk that up more to the media than the equipment. And so, the last point of talky business here, I've been reading online about taking out the built-in preamp for this model of turntable, and after finding a couple of A-B comparisons online, I am not going to attempt that mod. And it's not just because it would void the warranty, but I felt like it brightened the sound too much. Much brighter than vinyl should ever be. It's vinyl. You're always going to have all the hallmarks of vinyl in there, and to me it just brings those flaws that much more to the surface. And actually, I think it's kind of ironic that so many vinyl geeks complain that CDs sound too bright. Then they want to mod their turntables so that their records sound more like CDs. And since I've already ripped open the wound, just to tick off the audio files a little more, there's been talk of replacing the stock felt slip mat with either cork or rubber. And allegedly it improves the sound and it cuts out, I guess, deadens at least, the aforementioned rattle and hum and thudding. But personally, especially with cork, I'd kind of worry about static and the records themselves rubbing against the slip mat because it's a bit smooth. It just doesn't seem like a sensible slip mat to me. And rubber is fine, great, whatever. I don't think it makes any real difference. I used to have rubber slip mats on my first 2 turntables growing up, and I don't really see the difference. But I haven't had any static cling or slippage on the stock mat. And again, any extraneous noises thus far seem to be more a byproduct of the media, not the gear. But I will say that I do understand the notion of static cling on a felt slip mat. The Newmark had more of a carpeting style to it. It was a little on the furry side, and that would stick. But with this, I have cleaned a bunch of records on it so far and done all sorts of things, and both units, and I haven't had it stick once. So I think it's a pretty decent mat, personally. And at least in the short term, I'm going to stick with the status quo on that one. But anyway, at long last, let's do those playback demos. And otherwise, that's it for today. And I will talk to you, and probably at not so great a length, again soon.
This album was pre-recorded to self-destruct in 5 seconds.
Very interesting.
Face in the misty light, footsteps that you hear down the hall, the laugh that floats on the summer night.
Peace on earth, everybody, and goodwill toward men. And just at that moment, someone slugs Uncle Ben.